So I'm only after finishing Priory of the Orange Tree, and I have to say that I was a bit disappointed with the book. Um, it had been really hyped up, especially on TikTok and Goodreads and stuff like that, as this like new generation of high fantasy, um, and it was just a bit of a letdown, if I'm being honest. And there are a few reasons why that is, but before I go into those, I just want to say first that the book itself is honestly a monumental achievement for Shannon, the author. I think she's put a lot of work and a lot of thought and effort into particularly her world building. In this book, it's very obvious that there's a lot of love and a lot of care put into it, and I can appreciate those elements of the book. I do enjoy some of the characters. Honestly, I think others need a lot more work. But generally speaking, it's a very, very strong effort at a high fantasy book, particularly for one this long. Now, I've seen a lot of people compare this book to other books. The most sort of outlandish ones would be Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, work by Brandon Sanderson. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now that if you think that that's true, you need to reread those books and then read this book after it, because there is no comparison. This book is not on the same level as that. Not to say that this book isn't entertaining in its own way and good in its own way, but it's nowhere near as complex or as well flushed out and written as those works. So if you're intending that this is what this book is going to be like, you're going to be disappointed. So one of the main issues, I would say, and the most glaring issue with this book is pacing. The pacing in this book it's honestly atrocious. It's really, really bad, especially in the start. The start of this book is really, really boring, and this book is over 800 pages long. It's massive. Pacing is probably the most important thing that she should have been taken into consideration whenever writing this book, because the book was going to be so long. And if you're losing your audience 200 pages in, you can have as many great plot details and characters going on in the middle and the end of your book as you want, but if you can't get people through that first few hundred pages, there's no point. So I think that is definitely a major issue. The pacing needed to be sorted, and honestly, her editor should have picked up on that and told her, listen, you need to restructure this a little bit so it flows a little bit better, because you're going to lose your audience around the 200. After the 200, 300 page mark, it does improve. A lot more starts to happen. The characters are starting to basically have the events unfold, and everything that she's been setting up to this point, it's starting to unravel. So it is. So it gets interesting up until towards the end. I had like the 700 page of this book, and I was sitting thinking to myself, we're kind of wrapping towards the end, but there's not a lot left in this book. So where are we fitting the ending in here? And the answer to that question is, we're fitting the ending in within the next 40 pages, and then it's done. And it really leaves you with a kind of, wait, was that it kind of feeling? Like the ending is so rushed. And honestly, it's a bit disappointing, because this book is huge, like I said, and there is so much breathing space to stretch out that main conflict as much as possible, but it's not chosen to be done that way. And honestly, again, I would say that the editor should have said to Shannon, you need to trim off some of the fat and expand further on especially the ending. Maybe cut down a lot of the material in the start of the book and expand more on towards the end of the book. Would have made more sense to me. The next issue, I would say, is a lot of the characters in this book are kind of one-dimensional and sort of not interesting, which honestly is a bigger crime. My favorite character in the book is Iad. She is by far the most interesting character out of all of them. I also would find, myself looking forward to her chapters, and kind of getting a bit annoyed whenever I'd be pulled over to somebody else's point of view. Especially Tane's, if I'm being honest. I don't like Tane as a character. I think she's very flat. She's sort of self-flagellating throughout the entire book, and I think the thing that annoys me the most about her is that she is, anyone would have seen that she would have been a very useful character to have as like a utilitarian character to learn more about the dragons. And I'm going to get onto that a bit later because that's a big issue as well. One element about the characters, particularly Sabran and Ied, is their romance, which I was actually looking forward to because there isn't actually a lot of lesbian romance stories in fantasy and like mainstream fantasy, and I was really looking forward to seeing that depicted on the page. But it's very random. It kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, we're privy to Iad's thoughts. She's a point of view character, so we know what she's thinking at all times when she's looking at someone, if she's admiring them, if you know, she has some sort of romantic interest in them. There is none of that sort of set up in the beginning until basically the plot requires it to be that these two are now going to pursue this, even though there is no indication that Iad has any interest in Sabran to begin with, until this sort of random moment when Sabran, I think it was whenever she decided to get married, that was the only time then that Iad sort of, I don't know, expressed any interest in her at all. It's kind of a missed opportunity. I mean, 800 pages, you have a lot of space to fill up, and you could easily fill it up with a little bit more background on Iad, sort of show that that attraction is there to begin with, that sort of curiosity, and, you know, you've got that problem fixed. But something so simple that would make that a lot more believable and a lot more easier for people to digest. You know, I don't see the two together because that foundation wasn't laid, and I just think it's kind of distracting. It's just an example of someone that should have been flushed out that just wasn't. And our two male POVs, honestly, I felt like they should have been reduced to side characters. I don't think you need their POVs. A lot of their plot, I felt, should have been given to Ied and Tane, respectively. Because the story is more about them anyway. So it's about their coming together and their discovering of their history and their religions and stuff, and using that information then to make informed decisions about defeating the big bad. So I don't really see the point in focusing too much on these two characters. Now, I did enjoy the backstory for Nicholas and his lover. I thought it was kind of sweet, very tragic. And it was a good element of the book I really, really enjoyed. But apart from that, honestly, I feel like a lot of their plot points belong to the two girls instead. And the way it played out, you know, it just wasn't as satisfying. It sort of drew away from the pacing of the book. Again, another pacing issue. There's too many point of views in this book and they're not necessary. My biggest gripe, I would say, is the plot. It's one and done. It's very, very common plot. Big ancient evil coming back. People need to unite. Selfish people use their ambitions to get in the way. The heroes need to overcome it. It's been done to death, and it's been done better, I have to say. Not to say that there isn't interesting elements of the plot, but honestly, you can tell that it wasn't a big focus for Shannon when it really should have been, or maybe it was and it just didn't turn out quite right. The big issue, I think, is that so much of this book is centered around dragons and the mythology of dragons. You learn nothing about dragons in this book. Well, not nothing, but way too little to justify them being one of the major points of this entire book. I mean, again, Tani, such a missed opportunity to use her to learn more about the dragons. I didn't even really know the dragons were that intelligent until Tani was interacting with her own. And then I realized, oh, the dragons can actually speak properly. Like, I shouldn't be learning that so late into the book. Like, I should know more about these creatures, these characters. They're supposed to be characters. Why have them be intelligent if they're not going to be characterized? So that was a big issue for me, and honestly, it distracted me from the book. So I would give this book 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 sometimes if it's being thought of a bit more favorably, but honestly, I don't really understand the hype around the book. I think Realm of the Elderlings has a lot of female characters, and it's centered around dragons, which is a much better read. And honestly, I'll look forward to the prequel to see if she's improved her writing, but it's not too bad of a book.